Max and Lucy Langley were last seen walking hand in hand toward Dock 3 with popsicles in their grasp, and within an hour both were dead. Their mother, Rebecca Langley, told police it was a tragic accident, but her story kept changing. Her face stayed cold, and when the truth finally surfaced, it wasn't just her lies that shocked the quiet town of Monroe. It was what those lies were hiding. The Swan Boat Club sat quietly at the edge of the River Raisin, nestled among tall reeds and surrounded by cottonwood trees that danced in the breeze each summer. It was the kind of place where families returned year after year, where the staff remembered your name and your drink order, and where no one ever imagined tragedy could unfold. Children roamed freely with bare feet and popsicles, racing down wooden docks, chasing each other beneath the late afternoon sun. The river, with its slow-moving current and murky shallows, had always been more of a playground than a danger. Until that year, in July of 2021, the Langley family checked in for what should have been an ordinary summer weekend. Chris and Rebecca Langley arrived with their two children, 9-year-old Max and 7-year-old Lucy, in a silver SUV packed with pool floaties, fishing rods, and a cooler full of juice boxes. They had booked the same lakefront cabin they'd stayed in the year before, the one closest to Dock 3, with the white shutters and creaky porch swing. Everything seemed perfectly normal. On the surface, the Langleys were the kind of family people admired. Chris was friendly, always willing to lend a hand with a neighbor's boat. Rebecca smiled easily and often, especially when watching her kids play in the shallows. Max was outgoing and talkative, curious about everything, especially how things worked. Lucy was quieter, often seen trailing just behind her brother, copying his every move like a tiny shadow. They were happy, or at least they looked that way. The day it happened started out like any other. The sun was high, the breeze warm, and the docks crowded with families heading out for a day on the water. Max and Lucy had been seen earlier that morning eating waffles on the porch and begging their dad to take them tubing later. By noon, the marina was buzzing with boats coming and going. Children jumped from docks, and parents lounged under umbrellas, calling out sunscreen reminders that were mostly ignored. At around 2:30 p.m., everything changed. Rebecca Langley burst from the path near the cabins, barefoot and panicked, shouting that her children were missing. Her voice cracked as she screamed for help, her hands flailing in the air as if trying to physically pull someone's attention toward her. Within minutes, club members sprang into action. Some ran toward the river, others toward the woods, and several rushed to alert staff. It was chaos wrapped in disbelief. No one ever went missing at the Swan Boat Club, and especially not children. The search began quickly, but with confusion. People weren't sure where Max and Lucy had last been seen. Rebecca said they were playing near the dock, but no one recalled seeing them there that afternoon. Club staff checked the bathrooms, the game room, the snack shack. A pair of teenage lifeguards scanned the shoreline with binoculars, while boat owners cut their engines and peered into the water from above. Then someone found a small flip-flop floating just past Dock 3. It was pink with a white unicorn charm attached to the strap. "Lucy's," someone whispered. A hush fell over the group like a wave crashing. The fun of the summer afternoon drained from the air all at once. Divers from the county rescue team were called, and within 2 hours both children were found submerged near the far end of the dock, just 30 feet from their family's boat. They were lifeless. The club transformed overnight. Police tape fluttered in the wind. Parents held their children closer. The swing on the Langley's cabin porch swayed slowly, creaking like a haunted metronome. People wanted to believe it was a tragic accident, that somehow, in the briefest, unluckiest of moments, 2 children wandered too far and drowned. But something didn't sit right. Questions whispered behind closed doors. Why hadn't anyone heard splashing? Why were they found so close to the boat but unseen for hours? Why wasn't Rebecca with them? And then the unease deepened with a single thought no one wanted to speak aloud. What if it wasn't an accident at all? In the days that followed the deaths of Max and Lucy Langley, The Swan Boat Club turned from a summer sanctuary into a place of quiet suspicion. A police cruiser parked by the entrance gate became a daily sight. Yellow tape still fluttered at the far dock, though most families had already packed up and left. The laughter and music that usually drifted across the river had been replaced with hushed conversations and the eerie creaking of boats bobbing in silence. Rebecca Langley stayed mostly inside the cabin. Reporters camped out by the road, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but she rarely emerged. Those who did see her described her as pale, dazed, expressionless. Some chalked it up to grief. Others, quietly, weren't so sure. She hadn't cried at the vigil. She hadn't spoken during the retrieval of the bodies. She hadn't even attended the first meeting with detectives. Chris had gone alone. The investigation started with sympathy. Accidents happen near water, even to good families. But sympathy turned to confusion almost immediately. Detectives reviewed the Swan Boat Club's network of security cameras, mostly old, grainy footage positioned at key points like the front gate, parking lots, and the marina docks. They were looking for any clue of where the children had gone between 2:00 p.m. and the time Rebecca called for help. They found something, but it wasn't what anyone expected. At exactly 2:07 p.m., a camera mounted near the snack shack captured Max and Lucy walking toward Dock 3, each holding a popsicle. Max pointed to something in the water and Lucy followed. That was the last time they were seen alive. The footage ran for the next 40 minutes, showing countless guests coming and going, but not a single image of the children returning, playing, or falling in. No one else was nearby at the moment they vanished, just them. But there was another detail, one that made detectives uneasy. Rebecca Langley claimed she noticed the children missing around 2:30 p.m. when she went to hand them their lunch. She said she'd made peanut butter sandwiches and sliced apples, and that she walked to the dock expecting to find them eating by the water. When they weren't there, she began to panic. That was the version she told to police, to her husband, and to the guests nearby. But when investigators checked the family's rented cabin, something didn't add up. The small kitchenette inside the cabin was spotless. No crumbs, no dirty knives, no bread or apples laid out. Not even a trace of peanut butter in the trash. The sink was bone dry. Not a single fingerprint was found on any of the dishes. If Rebecca had prepared lunch, there was no sign of it. No evidence she'd even been in the kitchen. When questioned again, Rebecca's story shifted. This time, she said she had been taking a short nap after a headache and assumed the children were nearby. She said she thought Chris had taken them to the bait shop for lures, but Chris's alibi was solid. He'd spent the afternoon working on a client's boat engine at the marina garage. 3 other employees confirmed he had never left. The kids weren't with him. They hadn't been seen with anyone. With each passing hour, Rebecca's version of events crumbled a little more. And yet, when asked directly if she had harmed her children, she denied it with a blank stare. Detectives began to view Rebecca not as a grieving mother, but as the center of a puzzle no one yet understood. Why did she lie about preparing lunch? Why did she change her story so quickly? And why wasn't there a single moment of visible distress caught on any surveillance camera, even after the children went missing? As the inconsistencies multiplied, one question quietly grew louder in the minds of everyone watching. If Rebecca wasn't telling the truth, what was she hiding? And how far was she willing to go to keep it buried? The autopsy reports arrived at the Monroe County Sheriff's Department 3 days after the children's bodies were recovered from the river. Everyone involved in the case held their breath as the findings came in. Until then, nothing was certain. The deaths could still somehow be dismissed as a horrifying accident. But the medical examiner's conclusions changed everything. Max Langley had a crescent-shaped fracture at the base of his skull. The blow, delivered with considerable force, would have rendered him unconscious immediately. He had no water in his lungs. Max had not drowned. He was already dead when he entered the water. Lucy, on the other hand, had drowned, but she showed clear signs of a struggle. Deep bruising on her wrists, scratches on her neck and under her fingernails. skin cells not her own. It was no longer a mystery. It was murder, the once simple theory of accidental drowning shattered under the weight of new evidence. 2 children had died, but in very different ways. One silenced in an instant, the other forced under until her tiny lungs gave out. And somewhere in those final moments, Lucy had fought Rebecca Langley became the focus of the investigation, though no charges had been filed. She was still living at the Swan Boat Club, isolated in the same cabin where the children had spent their last morning. Her husband Chris had stopped speaking publicly. He moved into a motel outside of town. Neighbors whispered that he was beginning to ask questions of his own. When detectives returned to the cabin with a second search warrant, they found something they hadn't noticed before. Hidden in a drawer beneath a pile of swim towels and sunscreen was a small, black, leather-bound notebook. It was Rebecca's journal. Tucked among pages filled with grocery lists and Bible verses were entries far darker in tone. Stream of consciousness thoughts, angry musings, emotional confessions that hinted at something breaking beneath the surface. An entry read, "The noise never stops, always needing, always crying. I don't even know who I am anymore." Another, "I dreamt I was floating in the river, alone, just the water and peace, no one pulling at me, no one yelling, just me." But the most disturbing entry was dated just 2 days before Max and Lucy died. It said, "Sometimes I wonder what life would be like. If I had never had them, I could just float away and start over." The tone wasn't grieving. It was detached, almost hollow. Investigators felt a chill reading it. This wasn't simply a mother exhausted by parenting. This was a woman fantasizing about escape, freedom, without her children. Adding to the tension, lab results from the fingernail scrapings came back. The DNA under Lucy's nails matched Rebecca. With the physical evidence, the shifting stories, and the journal, detectives were ready to make their move. But before they could act, Rebecca did something no one expected. She tried to leave. On the morning of July 23rd, less than a week after the children's deaths, she checked out of the cabin and loaded her remaining belongings into her SUV. A staff member at the front gate noticed her speeding away and alerted police. She didn't make it far. Officers stopped her 10 miles outside Monroe, heading west on a rural road. She told them she was just going to get space, but in her car, detectives found an envelope containing $3,000, 0 cents in cash, a burner phone, and a map with several cities circled in red. They arrested her on the spot. Back at the Swan Boat Club, families stood quietly by the dock as news of the arrest spread. Some were shocked, others less so. They remembered the distant look in Rebecca's eyes that week, how she never spoke Max or Lucy's names after the vigil, how she cleaned her cabin the day after their funeral. The pieces had been there all along, subtle, chilling clues hidden in plain sight. But no one had imagined that the river, the place where children once played so freely, had become the final resting place for 2 lives, and the beginning of a case darker than anyone dared to believe. The courthouse in Monroe County was surrounded by media vans and cameras by the time the trial of Rebecca Langley began. It had been nearly a year since the deaths of Max and Lucy, and public interest in the case had only intensified. National news outlets picked it up, labeling it the Swan Boat Club Murder. Every headline carried the same chilling question: what would drive a mother to kill her own children? Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The gallery was filled with journalists, former club members, and local residents who had once considered the Langleys a picture-perfect family. Rebecca entered in a pale gray suit, her hair neatly pulled back, her face unreadable. She walked with calm, almost calculated composure. Some whispered it was eerie how unaffected she appeared. No visible grief, no visible fear. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. They showed photographs of the autopsy reports, the skull fracture on Max, the bruises on Lucy's neck, the scratches, the DNA match under her nails. They presented security footage, tracking the children's last known steps. Max and Lucy walking toward Dock 3. No return, no splashes, no witnesses, just sudden, silent absence. Then came the journal. Each page was displayed on the courtroom screen. The one about floating away without them, the one about losing her identity, the one about peace in the water. The jurors sat still, some shifting uncomfortably. These weren't the words of a grieving mother, prosecutors argued. They were the thoughts of someone unraveling, someone who didn't want to be a parent anymore, and someone who, with time and opportunity, had taken decisive, irreversible action. They described how Rebecca's story had changed. First sandwiches, then a nap, then blame, redirected toward her husband. But the facts remained fixed. The cabin kitchen had been clean, the children hadn't drowned accidentally. She'd attempted to flee town with a burner phone and cash. It all pointed in one direction: guilt. The defense, however, offered a different interpretation. They argued that Rebecca was suffering from untreated postpartum depression and long-term mental fatigue. They said her journal entries were not evidence of malice, but of despair. Thoughts scribbled in desperation, never meant to be acted upon. They claimed the timeline was murky, and the lack of eyewitnesses left room for doubt. Could someone else have been near Dock 3 that day? Could the blows to Max's head have come from a boat propeller? Could Lucy's bruises be from a panicked attempt to survive? The defense reminded the jury that Rebecca had never confessed, never left a note, and had no known history of violence. But the prosecutor pushed back hard. Motive didn't need to be traditional, he said. It could be born of exhaustion, of wanting out. And that, he argued, was exactly what Rebecca had written: wanting out. Throughout the trial, Rebecca never cried. She rarely looked at the photographs of her children. Some jurors noticed, some couldn't look away. Her husband, Chris, testified briefly. His voice trembled as he described the last time he saw his kids alive. He said he no longer understood the woman sitting at the defense table. There were no tears in his eyes, just distance. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated. It took only 5 hours. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The sentencing was swift: life in prison, no possibility of parole. As the verdict was read, Rebecca stood motionless. No tears, no gasp, just a shallow nod, as if she had been expecting it all along. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Somewhere outside, beyond the courthouse windows, the river moved on, quiet, indifferent, and eternal. But for the town of Monroe and the families of Swan Boat Club, nothing would ever move on the same way again. The case was over, the trial was done. But the questions, the haunting, unanswerable questions, lingered like shadows on the water. A year after the verdict, the Swan Boat Club reopened its summer season with cautious optimism. The docks had been rebuilt, the clubhouse painted fresh white with blue trim. The water glimmered under the sun just like it had before. But everything was different. The laughter returned, slowly. But behind every smile was a quiet awareness that something terrible had happened here. Something that couldn't be scrubbed away with fresh paint or time. The cabin where the Langley family once stayed remained locked, its shutters permanently closed. Most families pretended not to glance at it as they walked by. Some new members, unaware of the full story, asked casually why no one ever used Cabin 6. They were met with silence or a subtle shake of the head. It had become a ghost among the living spaces, unspoken but always felt. Yet just when the town thought the story had reached its final page, another twist surfaced. An investigative podcast covering cold and controversial cases released a multi-part series on the Swan Boat Club murders. The host, a former journalist, had received an anonymous letter claiming that key pieces of the case had been overlooked. At first, it sounded like the typical post-trial conspiracy theory. But then came something more unsettling. A single photograph mailed to the podcast team with no return address. It was a blurry image, time-stamped just minutes before Rebecca had called for help. It showed Dock 3 from a distance, partially obscured by cattails. but it captured what looked like a second adult figure standing near the edge of the dock. The outline was hard to identify, no face was visible. But the frame, the posture, it wasn't Rebecca, it was someone taller, thicker build, possibly male, possibly watching. The photo was never presented at trial. No mention of a second person had ever been made in court documents. Police later admitted they had received several anonymous tips early in the investigation claiming another person had been seen near the water that day, but those were dismissed as unreliable. No one had followed up. No one thought to question what else might have been missed. The podcast reignited public interest in the case. Listeners flooded social media with theories. Could Rebecca have been covering for someone? Was the DNA under Lucy's nails planted, misinterpreted? Was there another layer to the story that had gone ignored? And then came a second revelation, an audio clip left on the podcast's voicemail. The voice was muffled but male. He said only 8 words before hanging up. "She didn't do it. You've got it wrong." The clip couldn't be traced. The number was disconnected. But the damage was done. Public doubt, once buried, began to rise again, like something dredged from the bottom of a river. The police reopened their review quietly, more out of pressure than belief. Officially, they still considered the case closed. But behind closed doors, detectives combed through old interview transcripts. One name popped up that hadn't been mentioned since the earliest days: Tyler Quinn, a seasonal boat mechanic who had been let go just days after the children's death. He had worked the marina that summer. He had no alibi for the afternoon of the incident. He had also been arrested the year prior for trespassing at the club after hours. But the charges were dropped. No formal accusations have been made. No arrests. Rebecca Langley remains in prison, serving 2 life sentences. She has never spoken to the media. Not once. But those who knew her, really knew her, now say they aren't so sure anymore. They remember the confusion in her eyes, not coldness. They recall the way she'd once held Max close during thunderstorms, how Lucy had always clung to her leg during fireworks. They think about the journal, yes, but they also think about the possibility of being pushed past a breaking point, or worse, manipulated by someone in the shadows. And so, the story continues, not in the courtroom, but in whispers, in theories, in doubts that spread quietly through Monroe like ripples on a still river. 2 children died. She made excuses, but maybe, just maybe, someone else did too.